Hello, it's me again, and I'm straying away from Legacy Console Edition for a minute because I had this thought about an hour ago. This was very rushed. I was thinking about the Raspberry Pi edition, in quotes, of Minecraft, because it's something that, from what I've seen, doesn't get a lot of attention, and it's also kind of treated unfairly based on what I've seen. So I'm just gonna sit down and I'm gonna play a little bit and talk about it. So I will preface that I'm using what's called the Reborn client, which is it's the native Raspberry Pi binary, but it's patched to be able to run on other distributions. There are a lot of optional tweaks that restore things like survival mode, but none of those are on. I have it as bare bones as I could possibly let it be to try and represent this as accurately as possible while providing a smooth experience in terms of footage. It does say 0.1.1 alpha. That is not true. It's actually based on Pocket Edition 0.6.1, a hotfix from 0.6, which added cool stuff. It was kind of the era of Pocket Edition where there weren't any themings. It was just sort of, well, Java Edition got these things, so we might as well kind of throw them into, and then here's a bunch of shit that was missing before. It's very unorganized, which I can learn to appreciate. Just as what I know about the Pocket Edition team is that it was only a couple guys MOing, and it was just kind of, do what we want. Today we want to improve the game by adding this to it. It definitely led to some weird inconsistencies, things like weird green grass. See if we can find a rose here. I'm not seeing one, so I'll just place one down. The nice cyan roses. There's a lot of weird stories about this. I don't know what the real story is about the rose. There's claims that it was a technical limitation. There's claims that just wanted it to be a cyan rose. I don't really know. I'm more leaning towards the fact that they just wanted it to be cyan for whatever reason. So this was primarily based on, well, it is just a port of Pocket Edition, which is, I find really fascinating. Pocket Edition at the time, this doesn't really apply anymore, but it used to scale a lot better to low-spec platforms by nature of it targeting, that early Android era of gingerbread. I think 0.6 is when they dropped support for anything below 2.3. So it was right around the gingerbread era. That's what most people are running on. That's what I was using at the time. I didn't join until 0.8, so I didn't get to experience a lot of the weird Pocket Edition jank. It still was there, but it really wasn't as prevalent. 0.8's when, if I recall correctly, it's when they rechanted the grass to be proper. It's when they added cool things like the minecarts, but you still got, the lack of caves, which you were just left with only being allowed to mine in strips. Mining was not very fun. I'd argue Pocket Edition in general was not very fun at the time, because it's like, it was novel, and it felt like it was intended to be novel. To get back on track, it scaled really well, and that was important when you're targeting the Raspberry Pi's systems, because the 2 was relevant at the time, and the 2 had no chance of running any other edition. Plus overhead, which was required, because this was part of the suite of trying to target a younger demographic. Because it included a Python library with Python modules, so you could interact with the world via Python script. And there were books written about it. I own one of those books. It's really fascinating. There is a couple major discrepancies here from Vanilla Pocket Edition. The first one is being able to crouch. They added this out of nowhere. I'm not sure why they have this, but they do. And the other one is this kind of weird, quote-unquote, more mouse-friendly interface for the creative inventory. So what you're left with is, it is basically Pocket Edition. I realize I just contradicted myself. It is basically Pocket Edition. But you have those little weird discrepancies that make it its own thing too. And it really has sparked a lot of interest out of obscurity. And I find that really fascinating. But there are something I find fascinating is the Android launcher for modern Bedrock. Being able to play the Bedrock editions on Linux and Mac OS via the x86 Android builds with libraries patched out, similar to what the VITA community does with their quote-unquote Android ports, where they take ARM executables and they do hooks and patches to get things like Grand Theft Auto San Andreas running. So in terms of item selection here, it really was bare bones. You know, I'm trying to get interesting gameplay here, and I just can't seem to know what exactly I want to do. I built this sort of first ever creative home here. World generation here is really fascinating. It really harks onto beta with much more limited biome selections and the limited world size in general. But I always loved flying up here and getting on top of the world border. That was always a real highlight for me. So if you were in a survival world, you could just keep building up like this and eventually hit the border here. Yeah, here we are. You can just build up here. I hold a lot of, I don't want to say high regard. I don't think there's a lot here. There really isn't. You get your limited selection of items. You get a survival mode that kind of worked. But you're missing core features that made Minecraft important in the first place. And it does make me wonder why the goal wasn't always to just go the legacy console route and just say, oh, we're gonna start matching feature parity with alpha. Is it just to kind of keep people interested? Were people not interested in the legacy console route? Because it ended up spiraling into this problem that's still faced today, where massive issues with parity, where even basic features that can't be agreed upon in terms of how they function. So I mean, yeah, I know this was kind of disorganized. Pi edition in quotes is just one of those things that I think deserves to be talked about a little more. Early Pocket Edition in general needs to be talked about more. Everyone disregards it, but it has its own history, just like any other version. But if you try and bring out that conversation with a lot of people, there's no interest. There's disgust. While I understand why, because let's face it, this is maybe nostalgic for people, but this is also horrendously ugly. It still deserves attention.